And we've always known that. There are some people, as we know, who, for a variety of reasons, will require a supporting living environment for their lifetime. And that's okay. That's what we do as a caring society. So the first question is, do we have those supportive environments for those folks who will need the housing, the support, and so on, really for a lifetime? We can't, sometimes we have a tendency, I think, to say, well, if this person just had a house, they'd quit drinking. If this person just had a house, they'd stop the quick fix thing. A house, as many, shelter of some kind, is part of our social contract as Canadians and as Yukoners. There's other groups, as we know, that will require some support for periods of time, whether it's single parents or seniors or youth or those in correctional facilities. And let me mention one group that isn't very often talked about, but that I've had some interest in, and that is grandparents or sometimes other caregivers who are caring for their grandchildren, nieces, nephews, under often very difficult circumstances. These are people who do not want to put their grandchildren or nieces and nephews into care, but the supports for those people are really lacking throughout Canada, but here in the Yukon. Supports for a little bit of rent, financial in some cases, and I think when we talk about inclusiveness, it's not just the people who are on social assistance or have disabilities. There are a lot of people out there, and this is an increasing factor, I think, in the Yukon, of people who, because the parents of the children have, either have passed away or they have their own problems, are taking on childcare. And we need to support those people because they are doing a phenomenal job, and they need us too. So there's kind of that group that requires some transitional assistance. And there are other groups who are not necessarily low income, are not necessarily certainly without skills, but they're marginalized in other ways, either because of mobility issues, sight, hearing, many other kinds of issues. And we need to make sure, and to some extent we don't do too badly in Whitehorse, I'm not sure about the communities, with that, but we really need to keep that in mind, that social inclusion is not just people who are on assistance, but it is, of course, we want to focus on those groups. So social inclusion to me is really having the opportunity for everyone, whatever your experience is. And of course, Rick gave a good example when there was a stage that he couldn't get on. And I think he might have had a little problem with those salads that were about 4 feet high too, but anyway, we really need to just think about those things. It's certainly an indulgence, in my view, to spend our time today thinking, identifying the problems. Everybody's done that. We know what they are. They've been there quite a while. There have been lots of conferences, lots of seminars, lots of workshops, lots of plans of action. The problem is there have been a heck of a lot more plans than action. And I'm really heartened to hear people today talk about, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to get into action. And many of you are just doing it, which is great. Well, I tried to think of, I'm supposed to be talking about barriers, so I thought, well, what are they? And why are there barriers? Well, I think one is, you're familiar perhaps with the adage, whoever defines the problem defines the solution. And this workshop has tried to, involve recipients of some of the programs, but I think we really need to be serious at every level that we are with people and working with people, as the judge does, and others, to routinely in program planning make sure that we are doing that together with the people who will be the recipients of service. And I can't think of any group that this would be impossible with. But is it built into the way we plan programming? Maybe in some cases. Certainly the wellness court sounded pretty good. So I think one barrier is, in a way, a kind of traditional or psychological one that we're not used to always working with as colleagues the people who will receive services. So we are not just client-based. Why don't we be colleague-based? Because we both have something to offer. So I thought, well, is the barrier here in the Yukon the lack of caring people? Well, we got a huge volunteer community in all spheres, social, anti-poverty coalition, the arts, sports. Seems to me we've got an awful lot of people who care a lot in the Yukon. So my answer to that is, nope, it's not a lack of caring people. It's a lack of ideas. Well, we've got a lot of creative people here. We've got the ability to access models from other places. Some of them have been presented today. We have very creative, professional, educated people, who have a great sense of culture and what works for them. So no, I don't think it's a lack of ideas. So, no to that one. Is the problem too big? That's often something you hear a lot. Well, this isn't Vancouver, it isn't Toronto, it's 33,000 people. So if we can't do it here, it can't be done. So my answer to is the problem too big? Absolutely not. I just want to give you a little example about how people just saw something and they did something. Now, I don't know if there's anybody here who remember this, but in the 50s through to the 1980s, there were a group of women who saw that there were issues in the Yukon. And the result, they thought, okay, we're going to take some action. We're going to do something. And they established the 4th Avenue Residence, now the High Country Inn. They also got a bus system. They also got childcare. They also a clothing program. They also housed people. It was a terrific program because they didn't wait. They just did it because in those days, we didn't talk about strategic planning and it'll only take a few years. We didn't talk about what's the plan of action. By golly, they talked about action. Now, 50s to 80s aren't now. I was discussing this program once with a local business person who said, it was a failure. 4th Avenue Residence, failure. They had to close. Yeah, it was a failure, all right. We got a bus system. We got a childcare system. We've got some social housing. All of the programs that they started there, most of them, are now a part of the services that we all enjoy here in Whitehorse in particular. So it wasn't a failure. As an aside, Sheila Rose is doing a very interesting history of this project because it is the history of the Yukon, it's the history of women in the Yukon, and we're looking for funding for publishing. Okay, I just thought I'd mention that. But this leads me to the issue of documenting best practices. And some people that I've talked to here today certainly have informed me a lot of things, I have to say, as a citizen that kind of follows that a bit, I wasn't aware of. And they're excellent programs, and I commend all of the people who are working in them. As you know, there's programs like Sundog, which just received a fair amount of money. I mean, if you look at a program like Sundog Carving, I think it's going to be called something else, but, they took young people where they were at and have helped them to develop. And I have talked to the parents and grandparents of some of the young people who've been in that program, and they say it saved their life.